Good morning. I'm Heather McGrath. I'm the site facilitator for the Healthy End of Life project at Orleans United Church. The impetus for the caregiver workshop started, probably 6 years ago. And I was sitting with a group of women at Orleans United, and they were, complaining about their husbands. Nothing new there. But in this case, all the husbands had recently been diagnosed with a chronic illness. In most cases, it was diabetes, but the women were furious because their husbands were not following the protocol. They weren't taking their medications properly. They weren't exercising the way the wives thought they should. They weren't following the diet that the wives were working really hard to get them to follow. So there was a lot of frustration and a lot of anger. And I thought, if we don't do some education and support for these women, there might be a homicide in my congregation. Now, the anger was certainly born out of fear, because with chronic illnesses, if you don't take care of yourself, with diabetes particularly, there's a huge risk for heart disease and stroke. So the anger was justifiable, as was the frustration. But both those feelings produced a lot of guilt, because nobody wants to be angry and frustrated with their loved ones all the time. So we created the caregiver workshops, and I'm a big believer in peer support and peer learning. So it was important to me that we offer a lot of time for peer interaction, whether that was in large groups or small groups or informally over coffee. And we always had tea, coffee, juice, and goodies, both healthy and unhealthy, for people to eat. Now, the research at Christ Church Bell's Corners showed that caregiver needs were not being fulfilled. And we certainly found that at Orleans United too. It's a group of people who are isolated and struggling and need support. So I was delighted when Jen and Colleen came to me and said, could we run your caregiver workshop at CCBC? And I was delighted because the research that we did after our first session at Orleans United showed that it was really valuable to the caregivers. But on the other hand, it was the pandemic, and I was concerned about how the peer learning might take place when we couldn't meet over coffee and sandwiches and cakes and cookies. I was absolutely delighted that it worked out well. People seemed to relate to each other quite well over Zoom. Even though we couldn't see all the body language, we could see facial expressions. My other concern was that Elaine Bonnell from Queenswood United Church and I have co-led a lot of these sessions, and we're really good at picking up on each other's body language, stepping in front of the other one when it wasn't planned, and it works out really well. And I wasn't sure how that would work out over Zoom. But in fact, it worked out really well. There maybe were a couple of apologies as we cut each other off, but in fact, just like the attendees, we could read each other's facial expressions, and it worked out really well. So I really think that this peer learning and peer support is so important in all communities, but especially in communities of caregivers. Now, we didn't talk about specific diseases because caregiving is caregiving, and those big, heavy feelings are universal for all caregivers. So we had 8 sessions at Orleans United, and in conjunction with Colleen and Jen, we whittled it down to 6, I think it was, because it was over Zoom and people get tired of always being in front of their computer screen. So Elaine and I did 2 sessions, one on handling stress and one on handling those big emotions, not just handling them, but recognizing them, that they're universal and they're acceptable and they're part of being human. At Orleans United, we had closed each session with a guided meditation. At CCBC, we changed that to tapping. We had a wonderful lady to teach us how to do tapping as a stress reliever, and it was extremely well received. Jen and Colleen found subject matter experts for the other areas: how to cope with grief and loss, all the legal aspects that you have to deal with, dealing with your inner critic, which we all deal with, but when you're a caregiver, it's even worse. And that great big question, where is God in all this suffering? So the research and then the follow-up that Jen and Colleen did after the sessions showed that it was very helpful for all the caregivers. And I'm certainly hoping that they run it again and that you look into this toolkit and find ways that you can support caregivers in your community.